Chris Sierzant, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks heaps, Jordan. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think you've got a pretty interesting story, mate. So a little bit of a different twist and perspective on things today. And, for someone who's kind of started recently, even like sort of 22 months in, it hasn't been a huge ride for you. And obviously, it's been through that pandemic phase of, should we invest? Should we not invest? I don't remember if you remember sort of March 2020, but everything was up in the air, and then it's been quite a ride ever since then. But mate, tell us a little bit about your background and how that journey sort of kicked off.
Yeah, so my wife and I live in Tassie, and we're in our mid-30s, and we started investing at the beginning of the pandemic, and we've sort of ended up accumulating. We got 6 properties over about 22 months, and that really started because I was actually in between jobs at the time, and on my first day of being unemployed, I actually rolled my ankle really badly. So I was on crutches for like 6 weeks and I couldn't get off the couch. So that was actually this catalyst to start to learn about finance. And I just jumped into YouTube and podcasts and Facebook forums, and I'd probably consume about 12 hours of content every day. And I just sort of uncovered this untapped passion that was there that I never knew was there. And I just fell in love with it more every day that went by.
Hey, that's awesome. 12 hours of content a day. I suppose if you're stuck on the couch, you could probably get through that. But what do you reckon on a day-to-day average now you'd be consuming?
Oh, easily 2 to 3 hours every day.
Yeah. I'm the same.
That's definitely by choice. Yeah, totally. It's definitely by choice. Like you love it. And it's funny, like you develop these uncovered passions. And like I said, I love it more and more every day. I never get sick of it.
Yeah, well, 6 properties in 22 months, mate, is pretty phenomenal. So hats off to you, especially starting from the first one and building it around there. And I guess through that journey, you probably started to build a little bit of a philosophy around building out a portfolio. Do you mind sort of delving a little bit deeper into what that philosophy looks like?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a really good point because for us, we wanted to try and do it the right way. And the question is, how do you figure out what's the right way? There's so much information out there. And so we kind of broke it down into, 3 kind of points in our philosophy that we landed on. And the first one was around our mindset or attitude, and thinking about why we're going to do it. And then the second element was like, okay, how are we going to do it? We decided we want to be really professional about it, and we wanted to treat it like a business. And then the third point is probably around, education and research. So I'm happy to jump into and go through each
go for it.
In that philosophy, if you like.
Go for it.
So the first one's around, mindset and values. And I think that's really important because it's really easy to jump into some of the detail. And to take a step back, you probably want to think about the type of investor you want to be. You want to think, what's important to me? Why do I want to invest? And there's no right or wrong answer with that at all. So instead of just saying, well, I want more money or I want passive income, it's probably a good idea to think about what that actually means to you. And, maybe it's more time with family or it's more time to do things you love. I guess that's important because for us especially too, you're going to have rough days and you're probably going to question why you're doing all this. And that's where you can come back to the why. It keeps you focused and on track. And so for me, I think the mindset and attitude is really important because that is what's going to push you forward on the good days and the bad days as well. And that doesn't need to be a big thing. It just needs to be one sentence. And we've got, our property plan printed off on the fridge. So we kind of look at it and see it every day. And it's there and it keeps us accountable and on track. So, and I guess once you have that sort of mindset drilled in, you can start to think, well, what will that sort of look like? A break from the 9 to 5. And that's when you can sort of move into some of the more detailed things around goal setting and trying to map that out a bit.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've always been such a big fan of the why. And I guess that, lots of clients that come to us sort of have this philosophy of, I need 100K passive income or I want 10 properties. You kind of get those typical responses that most people, sort of starting to get into property understand and sort of have a look at. But that's not the reason. That's not your actual why. The why is I want to be able to travel, or I want to be able to retire early, or I want to spend more time with my families during, my working career rather than, working 9 to 5, slogging hard, and then, being 50, 60, and then only being able to enjoy the family then. So I think it's super important and understanding sort of how you can get clarity around what it is that you actually want will help drive the momentum and building out the portfolio over the long term. And I love that you got the plan stuck on the fridge, because I think that's so important, is to be able to visually see something every single day. It does keep yourselves accountable, and if both of you and your partner are on the same page, then everything sort of stacks up. So tell me a little bit more about that plan and treating it a bit like a business on point two there.
Yeah, totally. So I guess one of the first questions that I had was around thinking, okay, well, where do I buy? And I think when you start out, that's such a common question, So I still see a lot of people saying, what suburb should I buy in? That's such a huge question. And I guess the answer is it depends, because there's so many different variables going into it. So, where do you want to be in the future? What's your time horizon? How many properties do you want? Because I think that your end goal will determine how you need those properties to perform. And so that end goal needs to be the first thing you look at. So for me, I think of it the same way a business might. If you think about a company, if you jump on their website, look at an annual report, you'll see values and a mission statement, and you'll see a bit of a strategy sort of mapped out. So I kind of think the roadmap should be really similar. And I think writing it down will help you think like a business as well. Like I said, it keeps you accountable. And at the end of the day too, we're talking about big dollars in property. So I think you should take it seriously, and having a plan, gives you that clarity and it gives you that focus. And so for me, I guess this is where it circles back to things like values. So for a bit of context, my background's in psychology and counselling, and I've worked with a lot of families in low socioeconomic areas. And I've just sort of seen if people live in crummy houses, their mental health will suffer. So space and place is a real determinant of health outcomes. And so for me, that's really important as an investor. That again comes back to my why. I don't want to be that property owner that has the busted taps and the poor heating and the black mold everywhere. Because for me, in my professional work, I've seen this a lot. And as a property owner, I want to be part of that solution too. So I might own a house, but really that's someone's home that they're living in. So for me, when I'm doing a reno, I always think of that, and that comes back to my this idea of being professional about what I'm doing. So, am I going to cut corners when I'm doing the reno, or am I going to do the best I can, And that's that whole thing. I think they say the standard you walk past is the standard that you accept. So, yeah, for me, that's something that's really important to me. And that helps me just stay really professional with what I do, always having that mindset and attitude front of mind. And that's probably what's driven us from day one.
Yeah, cool. Tell me about the correlation between, that plan that you sat down and then the 6 properties. Like, were the 6 properties always factored in what was going to happen, or did you find that you could continuously improve and build on the plan as it went along?
Oh, we definitely improved it as we went along. So to start with, it ended up being just a table with some goals and some steps about, this is when we're going to do it by. And that really wasn't enough, because we jumped straight into the detail. So we sort of took a step back and thought, no, we need to start talking about this why, and breaking it down into, why we're doing it, how we're going to do it. And then you have the steps that sort of sit underneath there.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think, it's, and this is commonly what, I hear a lot in the space is it's all well and good to have a plan, but things do change. And I think it's so important to not just say, well, there's no point having a plan because things change. You should have a plan and then alter and manipulate the plan once things do change, because it keeps you on that trajectory, and you can start to move and manipulate things as you go along.
Totally.
So on the third piece, then what was the third one that you had there? And do you mind delving into that one as well?
Yeah, for sure. So the third step, I think, would be around sort of, with our philosophy, it's around like education and researching well, picking out your steps, and then picking strong assets. So for me, I guess that's really about getting into the nitty gritty. And I guess that's where that plan comes back to it too, because for us with our plan, I think we're now on version 14, of that plan, and it has to continually evolve. And I've sort of kept each version as we've gone along. And you look at the first one and you go like, wow, so green, and didn't know what we were doing. And then you see this thing evolve over time. And when you sort of reflect on that, that's when you can sort of say, well, wow, we have actually done a lot of research, or we have, looked at a whole heap of criteria to get where we are. So that's sort of the third step, is around getting into that nitty gritty. And it's probably shaped some of the more tactical things that we focus on. So for us, when we were doing a lot of our why and our mapping, we started to figure out what are the things around investing that resonate for us. So some of those things are, we like property to be a long-term hold. I like the saying that, cash flow keeps you in the game and capital growth gets you out of the game. So for us, I really like to focus on buying strong assets. I like looking at decent land size for future upside. I really like picking in good suburbs, in nice streets, being close to a CBD. And I really like to aim for some sort of an X factor. And that can be something like a value add through a renovation or development, or it could be a water view, or it could be in a cul-de-sac or a really nice street, something like that that's going to sort of set you apart from your peers. And for us, the underlying philosophy there is that we want to aim for capital growth, particularly for those first few properties, so that we can extract equity in order to go again for the next purchases. And that's probably worked really well for us. Our principal place of residence and our first investment property, they're the only two properties we've pulled out equity so far because they've performed so well. And it's been those first two properties that, have really allowed us to purchase 5 more.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I think you're spot on in terms of the way of building out that portfolio. You do really want to get into foundational assets first, use the equity. I think it's so interesting that you've only pulled out equity on the first two, which is so critical. And then slowly you continue to transition and build out the portfolio as you go along.
Totally.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, you're on iteration 14 of the plan. So if you had the opportunity to go back and talk to younger Chris 22 months ago, what would you say to yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think like a lot of people would say, and this is a bit cliched, but one thing I'd change is I would have started earlier. So for me, I began in my 30s, but my biggest mistake was actually my relationship to money. I never invested the time to critically examine that relationship. When I was in my 20s, I had a good job, I had a steady income, but I didn't know how to use money. And I was the type of person who'd shout drinks for everyone. I'd pop it on the credit card. And then before you know it, that's 40K of debt. And I didn't really tell anyone. I kept that kind of quiet and didn't really have any plan around that. So for me, home ownership in my mind was something for future Chris to worry about. So it wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I sat down and was like, okay, I need to start adulting here and I need to develop a system to get out of that. So I set up an Excel spreadsheet with all my debts and I essentially had a plan. I mapped everything out. I plotted out each fortnightly repayment so then I could see that final figure where I'd get back to zero, and I kind of snowballed the debt from there. But I'm also really glad that I had that experience because it did teach me the value of money. And so now I think about my relationship to money and I see money as a tool. It's a resource that I can cultivate, I can grow it, I can use it, but it's also just money. So for me, it's not good or bad. It's just a tool that I can use. For me, I think detachment is really important there. And that's something I've learned along the way. And it's actually helped me with the purchases too. So I started to look at it not in the sense of like, okay, I can borrow X amount. I started to look at value and I started to look at houses in that way and thinking like that's the metric I should be using to determine whether this is a good purchase or not. I'd look at it in the sense of saying, is this good value? And I think that's important because it's, sometimes our broker or the lender might say, look, you can borrow X amount. That doesn't mean you have to borrow all of that. And that's what can potentially impede you from acquiring more than 2 properties fast, this idea that you kind of have budget creep. And also when we're looking at investments, it's easy for us to look at it in the sense of, would we want to live there? And I think that's really important because ultimately for us, I do want to live in my investment properties. I would hand on heart be happy to live there because I've picked a strong asset. But it also means that I don't need to necessarily put in a massive, huge renovation and treat it like the place I would want to live myself. Because if I'm going to put a heap of work into my PPOR, that's where I'm going to live for potentially a long period of time.
Yeah, that's such a good distinction between the difference of the price of a property and the value of a property. And I think you touched on some of those fundamentals before, things that, water views, nice big block of land, all those things that really have a good intrinsic value deep down. The price on the surface is just what someone's willing to pay for it. So I think you've nailed it there. And then I guess, the listeners that are probably listening to this podcast probably are in a much more advanced situation than where you were at that younger period where you're sort of shouting drinks and got yourself into 40K worth of debt. But if there was anyone that was listening that is probably finding themselves in that position, what was was there a light bulb moment for you that you were just like, I need to sort this out? Or was there anything that you kind of triggered you to go, okay, I really need to sit down and look at these sorts of things? Or was it purely just the fact that, you now had this debt and you had all these repayments that you had to make? Like what made you want to actually sort that out?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think for me, the fact that once you start getting into some debt, it's easy to get analysis paralysis, and you sort of think, I don't know how I'm going to get out of here. And if it was really bad, maybe the bank would step in and let me know, or something like that. This idea that in the financial space, someone will tell me if I'm not doing good enough. So I'm making minimum repayments, I'm doing all these things, but that's getting me over the line, but it's not actually getting me ahead. And I think I saw a tool online where you can plug in your minimum repayments and the total amount you're owing. It'll tell you when you've paid that off. And I think when I plugged it in, it was something like dozens of years into the future before I would have paid off that minimum balance on that card. And that was probably a bit of a moment where I was like, wow, the system is not really designed to help you get ahead. You need to come up with that intrinsic motivation. You've got to come up with that initiative to try and get yourself ahead and sort of dig yourself out of that hole.
Yeah, I think it's spot on. And as you said, it's really just about taking action, like sitting down and looking at those numbers and understanding, well, if I only do the minimum, this is where it's going to get me. Whereas if I go a little bit more aggressive and put a plan towards getting rid of it, then I'll be in a much better position earlier on. Now, obviously, in the journey of acquiring the 6 properties, there may be, there may not be, but has there been any sort of mistakes along the journey, and would you change anything about your portfolio?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In terms of things I'd change, I'd probably say there's been some hard lessons along the way, and touch wood for us, that hasn't led to any catastrophic failures or mistakes yet. But there's definitely been a lot of self-reflection. And I guess 2 sort of things that come to my mind around that. The first thing is that you learn the importance of relationships. So I think that's a really important one. So I know we talk about property as a game of numbers, but I would also say property is about relationships and it's about communication. So for me, I wasn't that proactive in that space. And I made the mistake early on of relying on emails. And I missed some really good opportunities along the way because I wasn't proactive enough around that. So I would say to people to learn from that, don't rely on email. It's super easy for us to do these days. We're so reliant on email as a communication tool. But I think to myself that, real estate agents are some of the busiest people on earth. And I need to think to myself, what can I do to make their job easier? So that's where you do things like you'd pick up the phone and you can convey what you want in a phone call much faster than you can in an email. And also just help start building a relationship, getting to know that agent as well. So particularly if you're looking at an area that might be out of your own town, if you can, and you have the means to, I think it's a really good idea to visit that real estate agent or visit that suburb in person at an open home. And I guess the general response I've found is they'll kind of be saying, wow, you took the time to come all this way and see me. It sends a message that you're serious about wanting to do this transaction.
Yeah, I think that's bang on. And you touched on a little bit of a hidden secret of mine is, if I'm seriously interested in a property or looking for something in a particular area, I'll even ask the agent if they want to go grab a coffee or something like that. You think about how busy they are and how many people they talk to and how many tire kickers there possibly are. They might be calling 100 people on a particular property over a certain period of time. But if you just say, hey, you want to go grab a coffee, and, it's only sort of 15, 20 minutes of their time, but that's not something that they frequently get asked to do. So, you kind of, if you want to be the person that the agent wants to sell the property to. If they like you, they're happy with your budget. You know, if you're competing with 10 other people around the same sort of budget, I mean, typically at the end of the day, the person with the biggest budget is going to miss out, going to win on everything, and everyone else will miss out. But if you can be the person that the agent wants to actually sell the property to, they'll work in your favor to try and get a deal done. So I think that is super, super critical, and you've nailed it there as well. Now, I know that you're not professionally working in the space, although you should be, given your story. But most people I see sort of turn this passion of property, and as you said, it sort of ignited not too long ago when you sort of realized the potential of money and making money work for you. But you know, what's sparking that journey now? What does the next sort of steps look like for Chris, and how do you want to continue to build the portfolio? Is there a thought of getting into a career around property?
Yeah, that thought has always been there, and it's probably been there from day one, from just uncovering that passion. And so, you know, for me, even though I don't work professionally in this space, beyond a shadow of a doubt, property is a huge passion of mine. And like I said earlier, even now I'm spending, you know, 2 to 3 days every day as a minimum, you know, whether it's looking at location or thinking about risk and how to minimize it, or like accounting. I love my bookkeeping, for example. You know, whatever it is, it's all part of the ride as an investor. And so I guess for me, some of the things that I'd like to leverage, I guess some of the things I'm really passionate about is around the lessons that I've learned along the way. So one of those being around financial literacy. So I'm really passionate about financial literacy and changing our conversations. And I think even in our language too, like I don't like the term landlord. I prefer property owner, because I think there's this idea that tenants are our customers, and property should really be a two-way street. And, you know, and people have been buying and selling assets for thousands of years. And I think that can be, you know, that can be a powerful and a positive transaction if you choose it to be that way. So, yeah, for me, I'm really interested about financial literacy. I'm also interested in the coaching and mentoring space. So like I said, my background is psychology and counselling, and I've been doing that for about 15 years. And so as it's turned out along the way, you know, you talk to family and friends about what you're passionate about. And so, you know, I've had friends and family that we've been helping along the way and having conversations and sort of building that confidence and mindset. And I think part of that too is also about having real conversations, you know. As an investor, if you've got a lived experience of what that's like, there are some things that, you know, you might not sort of get from the glossy brochures or something like that. And that's about realizing that you've got to have hard conversations and real conversations about what does property investing look like. So it is hard work, you know, and people should know that. So people don't, you know, you don't see the days where you're in the car at 4 a.m. and you get back at midnight, or you're doing 16 hours of painting and dozens of trips to Bunnings and things like that, or you're living in a campsite pretty much because you got your living room covered in tools and materials. So I guess that's been something I've been passionate about, is sort of sharing those little insights and gleanings along the way in terms of, you know, expectation versus reality. So yeah, I love engaging in that space because I get to help people change their attitudes. And much like you as well, like I'm just super keen to build my networks, meet other like-minded people who love this stuff as well. So in terms of, you know, what that will look like in the future, I'm definitely keeping that space open for myself.
Yeah, I think it's super important. People see this, you know, bought a property for 500, did a renovation, they sold it for 650, and it all looks amazing, and they've manufactured that equity, you know, over a 6 or 12 month period, but they don't see how much blood, sweat and tears go into the whole process, and, you know, all the dramas and the heavy costs and the blowouts of expenses and everything else as well. So I think you're bang on, and I think there's a, you know, a good demand for that in terms of learning the education, especially from someone like yourself who's, you know, done the journey and walked the path yourself, and you can relay some of the learnings and teachings of the journey that you've been on. But mate, there's 1,001 of them out there. But if you had sort of one favorite property one-liner, what would it be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have so many one-liners that I love to come back to, and I have some of them on the fridge as well because it's great. It just keeps you accountable. But if I had to pick one, I actually have a little bit of a story from a book called The Psychology of Money, which you may have read. And
that Morgan Pencil?
Yes, that's all. Yeah, so there's this really cool anecdote in the story, and he's talking about Joseph Heller, who was a really successful author who wrote the book Catch-22. And Joseph was at this party, and Jordan Belfort was there as well. So Jordan Belfort is an investor. He was actually the person that they modeled the Wolf of Wall Street on. And so a mutual friend came up to Joseph and he pointed to Jordan and he said, see that guy over there? He's made more money in one day than your novel has made in your entire career. And Joseph turned to him and he goes, well, I've got something that he'll never have. And the guy said, oh yeah, what's that? And he said, enough.
That's good. I love that. I think it's so important because you can just you keep wanting more and more and more and more and more and more. But where is that line in the sand, and are you happy with it? Mate, I love that. That's a cracking one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one because that you're absolutely right. You can just keep going again and again and again. And where do you draw that line in the sand? And for me, it's kind of funny because when I'm doing this stuff, the money, the outcome of getting the passive income, a lot of the time I don't think about that. Most of the time I get the thrill and the chase and the excitement of engaging in the property space. That's what I think about first and foremost. And it's kind of like the money stuff comes secondary to me. And I guess that's that thing when you have that passion, that's what you focus on, right?
Totally, mate. You can definitely tell you've done some research and you've locked in on those 12 hours of learnings each day. There's a lot of wisdom coming out of that mouth there, mate. But I really appreciate you coming on, Chris. You've given us plenty of insights, and mate, I'm really keen to continue to watch your journey moving forward. So maybe when you continue to start to build out the portfolio, we might do another bit of a catch up and see how things are going and see if anything's changed in between now and then. How does that sound?
I'd love that. Thanks heaps, man.
Cool, mate. Sounds good. I'll speak to you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, mate.